They had called me, said there was a warrant for my arrest.
Well, that's a call this young man never expected. Deputies looking for him to take him to jail on serious criminal charges involving drugs.
That's right. He says they got the wrong guy, but they booked him anyway. I looked into how this could happen and the repercussions he now faces because of the alleged false imprisonment. Ramon Nomar Perez Perez is now spending more time at home in Lehigh Acres with his family. The 22-year-old is now without a job and says his car was towed after missing payments several months in a row.
I'm a humble kid that's just trying to get by and fulfill his dreams.
Dreams that turned into a storyline straight out of an action movie. Perez Perez went to jail for crimes he says he didn't commit.
I told him, look, I'm not the guy you're looking for, but I am. But there's a kid in that police report that used my ID, and you're looking for him. So you arrested me, you're not gonna really get the kid, but I'm innocent.
The arrest stems from a December event here, right outside of Cantina 109, after the bar closed and ended up in the parking lot.
He got basically detained by his car, and he had a bunch of pills and weed on him, and when the officer reached in his pockets and asked, do you have an ID, he took out his cell phone and showed them a picture, and he said my first name out loud.
Perez says he only heard about what happened more than a month later when he learned there was a warrant for his arrest.
The Lee County Sheriff's Office found that it was sufficient for this perpetrator to show a picture of an ID on a phone, probably out of focus, probably on a table or something along those lines.
The only thing that will look the same, and not really, is our hair. My hair has more texture to it. His hair's more like poofy.
Fox 4 got a hold of the warrant request. It describes the night that the deputy approached a blue Corvette after a report of suspicious activity involving a group of multiple subjects. The affidavit says on December 20th, quote, a male later identified as Ramon Nomar Perez Perez, a black male, was standing at the open driver's door, unquote. The man near the blue Corvette was detained, but not booked into jail. The real Ramon Perez Perez, who is Hispanic, says he was at the nightclub that night and had to produce his ID to the bartender. He says he doesn't know how a photo of his ID ended up on the suspect's phone. He also says he was heading to a friend's house when the suspicious activity was taking place in the parking lot. Cut to January 29th, 2021. The real Perez Perez is booked into Lee County Jail, charged with possession of drugs and drug trafficking.
This is really serious. Like, they're saying that I'm looking at like 30 to 40 years.
The attorney for Perez Perez, James Chillemi, questions why deputies didn't take the suspect to jail.
And in this case, it's even more egregious because we're looking at 3 felonies, one of which being first degree, for drug trafficking.
Due to COVID, they didn't arrest him on that night. In order for you to get arrested, you have to do a violent act or a violent crime, like hurting somebody, in order for them to book you into jail that same night.
I reached out to the Lee County Sheriff's Office to check on their policy on booking suspects during the height of the pandemic. A spokesperson emailed me back a statement that reads in part, during the COVID-19 crisis, public safety requires that space remain available in the jail to house violent offenders and others who pose significant danger to the community. To assure we can accept and house those individuals who pose a danger to the public, consistent with major jails throughout Florida, the Lee County Jail currently accepts arrestees charged with violent offenses, DUI, domestic violence, etc., or who otherwise pose a danger to the public or property. Individuals who violate the law continue to be charged and held accountable. Nonviolent offenders who do not pose a danger to the public are required to answer in court for their actions through notices to appear, summons, or warrants. Dr. David Thomas is a former police officer and forensics professor at FGCU. He believes a drug trafficking charge, although not considered violent, should warrant an actual arrest, and that the deputy on that initial night should have taken the suspect to jail.
They weren't taking him to jail because of COVID. I think that's what drove this entire bus. Okay? And so he the bad guy got off because he had the advantage of COVID, and he was able to kind of BS his way through what was going on.
But I knew that I needed to clear my name, and I needed to do it like fast as possible.
Shortly after his release, Perez Perez called Internal Affairs, claiming he was falsely arrested. Usually there are several systems to run an on-site background check of a suspect. The internal investigative report even says, quote, the suspect demographics were not queried through the various database searches due to the subject regurgitating the information on the driver's license without hesitation, coupled with the fact the picture looked comparable.
They have admitted in their internal affairs response that they did not use any of those systems. And the reason that they quote is that there was a ruckus around the car that were where they arrested the suspect.
The simplest database is fingerprints. And it doesn't take long to go and run the prints in the jail to determine who the person is. It takes less than an hour.
After Perez Perez was released, the internal investigation report says he thought he knew who could be using his identity and gave the name to the arresting deputy. It goes on to say that the deputy then realized he had been given a false ID that night around the blue Corvette. According to the investigation report, the prosecutor and sheriff's office agreed not to file charges against the actual suspect due to other active criminal cases against him and because of, quote, issues regarding the case as a whole.
He needs to be made whole. That was their mistake, and they owe that to him.
While Chillemi is working on expunging his client's record,
I would like to see them recognize that this behavior and this protocol is unacceptable. And it has now, to the tune of perhaps a young man's career, a young man's moving into the job world, has affected him forever. And so I'd like to see some sort of mea culpa, some sort of compensation paid to my client.
I had to change the way I lived.
Perez Perez says through all of this, his family has been his biggest support and tells me he is still hopeful that his life will turn itself around. I also reached out to the other sheriff's offices in Southwest Florida to see if they have an arrest policy due to COVID. To read their responses, including the full statement released by the Lee County Sheriff's Office, you can visit our website, fox4now.com.